Gender Mobility and the Intersection thereof webinar series with Women Mobilize Women. We know throughout the series that what we've been discovering is that the intersection of identities and experiences really does produce different perspectives in terms of how people experience mobility, but also how they access it and how comfortable they feel. And so as a result, when we're looking at gender sensitive mobility transition, we need to look at something more beyond just one's identified gender and look at things like race, like economic access, ability, age, the time in someone's life. So future episodes will look a little bit at that as well. And how that all impacts how we move. And so our hope is with this series that we help to unpack some of those topics and really help to understand the differences and what's important in creating equitable and gender responsive mobility systems. So thank you for joining us today for this episode, where we're going to be focusing on anti-sexual harassment campaigns. We pre-recorded our interviews because we know sometimes it's difficult with all different geographic locations for people to join, but we're really pleased to have been able to interview Federica Raiti and Arianna Vignetti from Road to 50%, as well as Agita Pasaribu, who joins us from Bully ID and is part of the Global Youth Road Safety Alliance, or YOURS, to provide their insights in terms of the work they were doing and also some valuable thoughts on how we can move forward with more safe and comfortable systems. So with that, I'm going to ask Maggie to press play on our recording, and we'll see you at the end. One note, sorry, before we press play, it is a longer episode. Usually we try to come back at the end for questions with our experts, but I encourage, because of the length and because we're respectful of people's time over lunch, if you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat throughout the recording, and we'll do our best to respond. And if we can't get everyone's questions before the end, then there is a way to reach out to people that is indicated at the end of the recording. Thank you and enjoy. Harassment in mobility has a very real and direct impact on how women move in public space. From routing choices based on the time of day with available lighting, to overcrowding on public transportation, how safe women perceive a mobility option can have knock-on effects on their mobility choices and how they move in their day. Globally, an increasing number of advocacy organizations and government authorities have begun to take this issue seriously, generating anti-harassment campaigns that address the problem, as well as reporting systems that enable better recording of incidents of harassment. However, we are still continuing to see extreme examples of women's lack of safety in mobility. In this webinar, we will discuss the role of anti-sexual harassment campaigns in helping to build awareness of the problem, as well as support improvements to the perception of safety in mobility. To do that, we are joined by representatives from two organizations, one based in Indonesia and one in Italy in Europe. We have Agita Pasaribu from YOURS, Youth for Road Safety, as well as from Road to 50%, Federica Raiti, there we go, and Arianna Vignetti. And together we're going to discuss their respective research and campaigns and how policy and decision-making can use this information to act on improving safety and mobility. So I'm going to begin actually with allowing each of our groups to talk about some of their campaigns that they've been working on, and then we'll have a generative discussion on what that looks like and why it's so important. So first off, I'm going to start with Agita to present what her work with YOURS in terms of her research and what she's been doing. So I will pass it on to you, Agita.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So my name is Agita, and I'm representing YOURS. YOURS is Youth for Road Safety, and organizations that basically promoting road safety among young people. YOURS basically have the funding that available for young people, which my organization based in Indonesia is the beneficiaries for that funding, where we are basically delivering the program in Indonesia to promote protections among young people, and especially for women, for prevention of harassment in the public space. Um, the organizations that I founded, it's called Bullet Up. Basically, Bullet Up, it's the pioneering of tech charity where we are focusing on providing psychological, legal support for victims of harassment. But beyond that, we also provide a lot of our training programs and education aspect. So the project that is funded by youth, by yours in here, is basically called Safe Right Jakarta. So Safe Right Jakarta in here mainly focusing on the aspect to um, making the public space and especially for the public transportation safer for everyone, especially for women and young girls, to ensure that we would like to educate more young people in terms of different types of harassment, public harassment, especially in the public transport that happened in Jakarta, which many of young people are not well aware, and therefore many of the victims basically left behind and not reporting these cases to the law enforcement. So I'll stop there, but happy to explain a bit later. Or do you want to keep going?
No, that's perfect, Agita. And as you said, we can talk more about it as we get into the questions. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Road to 50%.
So, hi everybody, I'm Federica Raiti, and I'm the Vice President and also working on and co-leading the campaign of Mezzi per Tutti. Per tutte. We are working on different aspects, and Arianna will explain our organization better.
Thanks, Federica. I'm Arianna Vignetti, and I work in the field of feminist politics and women's empowerment in politics, public institution, and also humanitarian sector. I'm the president, co-founder of Road to 50%, and as Federica said, we are running the Mezzi per Tutti campaign. What about Road to 50%? Well, Road to 50% is basically a European association that develops strategies to achieve the gender balance in politics, institution, and all the top level decision making. So the idea is to create then a domino effect in all other sectors, and so improving the lives of the entire citizens, basically. We are Europeans, and we promote the international feminism that recognize, of course, structural, cultural, social, and economic differences in, of course, promoting equal opportunities for basically every individual. We were born in March 2020 with the aim of bringing about the real change in our society, and we have developed two basic strategies, our main roads. The first one is the gender equality training accessible to all, and the second one is the gender mainstreaming approach, the idea of integrating the gender equality into public policies. And so, by these strategies, we create several projects in social, political, and economic spheres to allow for the full development of fair and favorable society. Actually, we have like 5 active projects in various areas. The first one is the Gender Equality Week, a European week of training in political, economic, and communicative fields. Of course, on the topic of gender equality. And then we have the Road to Election project. It's basically a training program for those who want to run for office or start a political career. It aims to provide essential tools for fair access to, of course, the political environment. And then we have like this Festival of Equal Opportunity, which is basically annual festival held in collaboration with several institutions. With various panels, trainings, and so on. And at the end, we also in this environment create our strategy, also to involve both men and women that belongs to our association in creating a campaign such as Mezzi per Tutte, aiming to increasing the gender equality in our society. So Federica would better explain our campaign.
The campaign Mezzi per Tutte, as my colleague already mentioned, is a social campaign against harassment on public transport. It's currently cleaved into two pilot cities. One is Bologna in the north and in Messina in the south of Italy. And it is a bottom-up campaign, so bottom-top campaign. We would like to include everybody, every local collaboration, every stakeholder to create an environment and create a framework together to fight against the problem. We will discuss every kind of topic and every kind of statement later in the discussion.
Great. Thank you both, or all three of you, sorry, for that introduction to the work that you're doing. Obviously, it's quite valuable in terms of how do we ensure that women and everyone, in fact, feel safe and comfortable in mobility and has that equitable access to mobility. So thank you. So let's begin with our first question then. And Agita, I'm going to start with you. How in your work are you finding that the fear of harassment is affecting mobility for women or for people who identify as all genders, but mainly specifically for women?
Yeah. I think in Jakarta is basically a very dense populations, which is we are the capital city of Indonesia, and Indonesia alone have 270 million people. So many of the people are basically depending on public transport when it comes to going to the schools, going to the office, and etc. The fear of harassment severely limits women, especially women and young girls, in terms of freedom of movement, especially when we talk about public space like public transportations. When we did our survey, which is Safe Ride within the survey of Safe Ride Jakarta, we see that more than 56% basically women experiencing harassment, and it usually happens frequently in the time when it's very busy. So either early in the morning when they're going to go to office or to go to schools, or even evening, which is after hours, or even within in between of a school hours. The aspect of this, what we see within our survey, is that the fear sort of forces the women to avoid by using the public transport at certain times, and even to seek more expensive alternative like taxi or private cars, which this is actually not accessible for everyone. The level of people who are using the public transport, it's because they don't really have any private transportation, which is their own cars. And the issue when it becomes the public transport, usually their parents are not having trust by using the public transport, and make it very difficult in terms of the mobility. So this sort of kind of like restrictions of mobility has a severely direct impact on women access, especially young girls, in terms of to have the opportunity, and sort of perpetuates an inequality in terms of education and employment. So within our survey, we realized that it is important for for the multi-stakeholders to basically focus on this aspect, because when it comes to harassment, we're not talking only for the transportations agency, but also in terms of the cybercrime agency. Again, it goes to back also in terms of the educations that we provide for in our schools. Indonesia is the country that we do not have mandatory comprehensive sexual education in the country. So many of the women and even young girls do not have the knowledge in terms of the educations in terms of sex education, and therefore when they are experiencing harassment, especially sexual harassment, there is a huge border in terms of whether or not this is actually harassment or not. So the awareness and education, it's not there. And this is also beyond just the fear of harassment by by the victims, but there is also an underlying issues that many of the victims are not realizing they actually become the victims of harassment, and therefore there is a lot of cases it's just left behind, they're not being reported, but it's becoming a snowballing effect because there's more and more perpetrators just basically keep doing their actions because they're never being persecuted. So I think we're not just talking about the fear in here, but we're also talking about the underlying issues. Therefore, it's important to basically have a multi-stakeholder corporations to really tackle on this issue.
Yeah, wow, that's it's so important, I think, for me and for everyone that's watching here to learn, what are the different perspectives, also based on geographies, and to understand the underlying issues in terms of young girls growing up in Jakarta, in terms of their access to education as well, not just in terms of how mobility provides them access, but also that access to knowledge and how that's all intersecting in terms of their experience, I think is so valuable to know. So thank you for sharing. Moving on to the European continent, Federica and Arianna, in terms of your work and what you do, how do you find, maybe it's European context, maybe it's global, that fear of harassment is impacting the women that you're working with or supporting?
Oh, well, thank you, Melissa, for your question, and thank you, Agita, for getting straight to the point. The topic of fear of harassment greatly limits women's mobility, making public space feel unsafe and accessible also in Europe. This fear isn't abstract at all. It's a daily reality for so many of us, whether it's choosing safer routes, avoiding public transportation at certain hours, or opting or not to go at all. Harassment shapes how we move in our cities. It limits us not only in terms of where we can go, but also what opportunity we can reach. For example, research shows us that over half of the women in Europe feel unsafe using public transportation, especially at night. And this fear directly, of course, affects our access to job, education, social life. For example, if I think about another country, not Italy, I'm talking about, for example, Barcelona. Recent studies show that around 91% of women aged 16 to 25 have experienced harassment while they were using public transportation. The subway is particularly problematic, with nearly the 60% of incidents, compared, of course, to the 7% on buses. But okay, this is a very important topic that we have to address, also because, for example, this survey that the municipality made find out that, for example, this fear of harassment, of course, restrict their freedom of movement and forcing them to change their routes, their travel times, or even to avoid the public transportation altogether. So this has a real impact on the access to opportunities, whether it's getting to work, attending educational programs, or even, as I told before, having a dinner or participating in a social event. As a consequence, women are often forced to spend more money on alternative forms of transportation, like taxis, just to feel safer. And this creates, of course, an extra financial burden, particularly for those of us with lower incomes, because, of course, no one can afford maybe to pay a taxi or also to have its own car. So, for example, I remember about a study that shows that women spend on average an extra 2,000 per year regarding the topic of not being able to access to safer transport options. And of course, this money could be better spent elsewhere in other things. So public transportation is supposed to be one of the most democratic system we have. And this is also the reason why we choose Mezzi per Tutti as a campaign to address this topic, because unlike owning a car, it is affordable. And of course, in some cases, it's even free for most vulnerable people in our society. So it should provide equal access to mobility for everyone. But when so many women like myself feel unsafe using it, we are essentially excluding half of population from this democratic right to mobility. And so I think that this topic goes even beyond our personal safety, because it affects the broader movement toward a more sustainable future. We know that the discussion about the green sustainable future is something really is a very big topic in our days. So we think that there could be not real green transformation without public transportation playing a key role in our cities. Of course, if we want to encourage people to leave their cars at home and to move public transportation, we must feel safe to go with buses or take the metro and so on. So moving toward a greener future means, of course, encouraging more people to use public transportation instead of cars, but it's only possible if every one of us feels safe and comfortable in doing so. So Mezzi per Tutti is addressing this topic, and maybe we can explain it better later.
Yeah. No, I was thinking, that's a perfect segue. And I think it just, in what both you, Agita, and you, Arianna, have pointed out, is that this is something that's impacting women the world over. There are extra expenses that come along with it that you both pointed out, that we need to be mindful of, knowing that even in the same job, women are making less money than men, but women are predominantly working less full-time jobs, more part-time work, more service work, where the incomes maybe aren't as higher as their male counterparts, which creates an additional burden in addition to if they have family members they need to care for, and so on and so forth. So I think, but with everything you've said, both of you, I think it's a perfect segue into maybe having you explain sort of how campaigns help to address the problem. And Federica, maybe if you want to jump in from the Road to 50% perspective with the campaign that you've all been working on there in terms of how that's helping to address the problem.
So yes, I would like to explain how it started, because as I said before, it's bottom-up campaign. It started actually with the perception of a need. Our activists started actually discussing about the topic after a meeting that we had late night. They had to go back, and as we said before, affordable tax is an issue in many of our biggest cities. So we started, and we understand that the burden for everybody was not addressed by a lot of people. At the same time, beside the affordability, also that there was no data on it. There was a gender data gap on public transportation and harassment. So we started, let's say, to address the topic by the fact of collecting data. So we started by starting an exploratory survey in the city of Rome, where our activists were based. And while we were collecting, it was actually around 2,000 people collecting, answering our survey. We collected data and we saw, okay, everybody knew about the topic. It's an invisible but very perceived topic, and no one is doing anything or addressing the topic in any way. So it was like a step-by-step campaign that we created while we were talking also to people about the issue, or this invisible issue that everybody knew and was aware, that the awareness of the topic was such an invisible and clear to everybody, but no one feeling as a violence, as a harassment, because it was so spread. We had, for example, around 80 or a bit less of 80% of the people that addressed the topic and said that they were being harassed in public transportation after realizing that it was such a spread issue that we never consider as such, because our mother, our friends, who hasn't sent a message saying, okay, I'm home, everything is safe. So it's a very common issue. And then we started talking and we understood, okay, there is also a gap of awareness of the problem. So the violence that is perceived in public spaces, but in public transport in this case, was normal. It was very in-depth in the society, in the young, but also in the older women that we talk, and also with men. It was a very spread topic, and no one was really addressing or going to report it in any case. So the survey was actually a good way to understand and collect the impression. And then we started, as you see on the screen, this awareness campaign in buses and in trains. And we started by saying, for example, the man should stop the the bus and not for any kind of other harassment. So this slogan, which addressed the topic and way of harassment that we all know, for example, rather use your hand to stop the bus, and if you can switch to the other one, other slogans which are addressing, for example, eyes, keep your eyes on the smartphone instead of, for example, staring people on the bus or other public transport. So we collect data by creating awareness, and at the same time we understood also that preventing the problem. So while awareness is important, of course, but we should try to prevent the problem as well. So we start also to provide and start to talk about the topic by providing training at school, but also by companies that ask us to address the topic. So having both addressing both aspects has been a huge commitment for our campaign. So the prevention and the understanding of the problem right now, by also collecting and putting all the stakeholders together. So collaborating with local associations, so having the point of view of all the local communities, because they are the ones experience the cities, the districts, because we know that also between districts and also between different public transport, it's important to understand where is the problem. As Arianna said, metro, buses, there is different uses, difference as well. And as well, talking with the decision makers. So we address the municipality. We start with the public transport companies as well, which are mainly public usually. So to put everybody in a pool together, on a table together, and to address the topic from the different angles. And that's actually how we address, how are we let's say complete the campaign. For example, the difference with other campaigns is that not all this angle are actually contained in one bunch.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And I think that's, it's, having that multi-pronged approach, I think, is really important. And a few campaigns I've seen or data collection works, that's exactly it. It's not just about collecting the data, it's what we do with it next and bringing the right voices to the table. Agita, in terms of the work that you've been doing with yours, can you talk also about maybe that intersection of the training program, but also the awareness campaigns and surveys and how that's helping to address the work in Jakarta?
Absolutely. So I think before even talking about the whole entire projects that we do under Safe Road Jakarta, I think one of the reasons why we chose Jakarta, not the other city in Indonesia, because Jakarta is rated as the 9th most dangerous city for women. And sort of there is a survey that mentions there's over 47 of respondents experience sexual harassment on a public transport, and majority basically happen in the bus, and then the rest goes to public, public trained, and then a public cars, which is a taxi. And the thing is about sexual harassment, as I mentioned earlier, it's not only affect those who are targeted, it also affect how safe all the women and the girls when they're traveling. And it is again is a between of a gray area whether or not they would like to report. And another aspect of being the victim, but also those who are witnessing this, when people are not educated enough, the witness also tend to avoid getting in trouble and not having enough awareness how to help the victims, and avoiding the perpetrator and how to help the victims to report. And we see that another aspect, the bus officers, those who are the bus officers who's supposed to help, they ended up being basically re-victimized people who reported. And sometimes the judgment coming to asking the victims, so why are you dressing up that way? And so we see that awareness issue is basically taking a huge aspect on this issue. That's why within the Safe Ride Jakarta, which is the whole entire 1-year program, we started with education training for young people. So we opened applications for Youth Ambassador Training Program, where we basically trained 53 of young people in Jakarta. We are in partnership with the Institute of Transport, The aim of this training program is basically to empower young ambassadors that we selected with the essential knowledge to combat sexual harassment in the public transport. So the topic that or the curriculum that we designed for them, it is not just talking about what is the harassment itself, but also the case study, where is the harassment that happening on a public transport, a line of understanding what is the legal framework that we have in the country. So it hopefully to incentivize people, because they have to understand that this is actually illegal, then they have the opportunity to report and help the victims if they basically witness that. We do provide them with also psychological first aid understanding. The reason is sometimes perhaps they're not being the victims, but they can be a witness. And if they become a witness, they can basically support, being able to offer support for the victims when they basically see that happen. We have what we call the 5D bystander preventions, which is to help witnesses to be able to either they can directly help the victims, or they wanted to delegate, or they wanted to help to document it, the issues. So the idea is basically to making sure that these youth ambassadors is equipped with the education's knowledge, so they become the champion of the cause and ensuring the safer public spaces. So after the training program, basically they will then provide another educations to their community. So the sustainability on that aspect. After that, we also have the awareness campaign, and the awareness campaign, it happened to be in commemorations with 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which is the one that's celebrated around the world by the UN. We started on 25th of November until 10th of December last year. We created 16 of online awareness, starting from interviewing people on a public transport. We also have an online talk show involving Ministry of Transportations and Ministry of Women Empowerment in Indonesia. So we involved 2 governments and 10 NGOs to basically talk about this issue. We also invited a lot of social media influencers, because the online awareness basically to put a message on social media, where majority of Indonesians young people are basically on Instagram, on TikTok. And within this awareness campaign of 16 days, we've managed to reach about 39,000 engagement on social media, which I think we're pretty successful and completely above the expectations that we wanted to have. And we also involved quite a lot of people to repost it, our message, and which is something that it's we really appreciate that from young people to to get the message from our end. It also followed by providing the reporting mechanism. Since we started to have the advocacy with the Ministry of Transport, we realized that what is missing in a public space is that young people or the victims do not know how to report this. The law enforcement in the country rather quite a complex in terms of online reporting, in terms of the sexual harassment cases. And sometimes the victims are not necessarily would like to go straight forward for the law enforcement. Sometimes they just want to seek for help. Sometimes they just wanted to let it out and talk to someone who can basically help them. So the reporting mechanism that we created, since we are a tech charity, so we already have that resources to create. So we create a reporting mechanism that is confidential and anonymous, respecting the privacy of all individuals. So when we receive that, it's basically handled by our counselors, and they will then be able to actually receive a free and confidential psychological support from our team. So from that aspect, we realized that many of the people who have experienced this way in the past, is 6 months ago, even 1 year and 2 years or 5 years ago, but they still remember. They still remember what happened to them, despite it's not entirely stopping them from using the public transport, but sometimes the trauma is there. Sometimes they still remember when they went to when they took the bus, they still remember where exactly the perpetrator at that time, and they still remember how did they feel. So it's the support that we provide in terms of the reporting mechanism and the support system of the psychological. This is what is missing. What from the transport agency. The transport agency at the moment basically do not provide a clear mechanism for reporting and for support system. So we are hoping that basically this is something that we can integrate it in the future. On top of that, we do open for a survey, which is also available in our website. So after that survey, basically we have better and clearer message from what exactly people needed from public transport, and from there we create a public recommendations. So this is the whole entire basically the projects that we did after from Safe Ride Jakarta. So the public recommendations essentially initiated to basically create the data, because there's a lack of data in terms of the public transport issues or challenges, especially on the harassment issue in Jakarta. So we wanted to show the data in terms of what is the victims of harassment experiences, indicating a significant gap between the incident rate and the awareness and how we basically use the reporting mechanism. So despite that, we currently have the sexual violence law in the country, which advocating for safer, but there is a crucial step that is still missing, which is the implementations. And many of the victims do not have the evidence when they are experiencing harassment in the public transport. So we are basically calling on this survey to making sure that there is a tightened multi-stakeholder corporations, but more importantly, there is a gender-sensitive planning in terms of the transport. One example that we have, which is in the train, basically there is a space specifically for women coach in Jakarta, which is normally in the pink color, which is really cute. But again, in the working hours, sometimes it's actually very full, it's very crowded. But it's also not being able to accommodate the whole entire woman within one coach. And it's only happened for the train at this current stage. But we haven't seen that on the bus. We haven't seen that it's basically being replicating in the different kind of a public transport. So I think gender sensitive planning, it's highly, highly important. And then in this public recommendations that we publish online, that we also providing this to Minister of Transport, is the aspect of how we can create inclusive design and safety as well for the transport agency, because transport agency is not just for public space, but also there is a private company, which unfortunately at the moment many of the private company, which is they label themselves more as a tech company instead of as a public transport, so as a private transport. So it makes it quite complicated in terms of compliance and in terms of the comprehensive regulations, which is I think still a little bit of the gap on that aspect. But the gender sensitivity and the safety reasons, this is what we are emphasizing very much on our public recommendation.
Fantastic. What I'm hearing from both of you in terms of the work that you all are doing is that it's not just as simple as just putting up a campaign and hoping for the best. It's about addressing the fears, addressing things before they happen, the importance of reporting, but also, Agita, as you pointed out, even the importance of having that support system for women or anyone reporting incidences of sexual harassment, that they have support there for them in terms of the emotional trauma that exists from that as well. So I think that's that's important for us to remember. And my last question that I had for you all was that, what are some tangible ways or tangible things that policymakers and decision makers can do? And I think you've all identified some of those ideas of, creating gender sensitive planning, having gender sensitive solutions in terms of, as you pointed out, Agita, the pink carriage, which I've seen in other cities as well, but it has limitations. And so it has to be multi-pronged. I guess maybe, and I'll go back to you, Arianna. Is there anything else in terms of policies that you think need to be addressed? Is this something that can happen or should happen at the local level, more national, or in the case of the EU, more at an EU level? Or, what is the best way that we can at least start building these policies into how we address fear of violence and the actual experience of violence?
Okay, well, our campaign aims, of course, to tackle this problem using, of course, also evidence-based approach. And we, after collecting data, we try to give many guidelines based on the best practices approach that can support the policymakers in order to adopt the best and the suitable solutions in the short term for their city. Fede, do you want to explain it better? Maybe also in the different case that where our campaign is based.
So yeah, the problem on hearing your question, but I can go ahead about the policy. So we, as I said before, we get into contact with the different stakeholder, and by having the municipality and the public transportation company on board, we discuss the several policy recommendation that we have studied and analyzed by the survey and by our discussion. So that's mainly what we do at the decision makers level. On the at the tables, as also Agita has addressed it, we have also the women's shelter, which are actually supporting us also from the psychological and from the understanding side of the problem, so harassment in general. And one aspect that we have also experienced by addressing this topic is that by addressing this topic, we can get into the whole topic of harassment, in the sense that we address violence as such for young generation, especially, which is like we talk about public transport and public space, but through this small topic, it's not a small one, but through this specific one, we tackle then different other aspects that, especially people who are not realizing that they actually experience a violence, then we get access to different other topics. So it's just a key topic for other issues as well. And we have started to have this discussion with the public policy as well. So seeing whether they can address, for example, in education with a gender lens, with the so it has the recommendation for public transportation. That's actually the main topic we have addressed, but it's spread to city mapping, education with a gender lens as well. So it shifts to a broader topic as a feminist city, but a feminist education as well. So with a participatory planning of the different stakeholders and the different angles. So I think that I covered all the
So I didn't send you all this question in advance, but I think hearing all of your examples and all the campaigns and where the gaps are, where we need to be focusing our attention, I could see viewers saying, well, if so much is this experienced in public transport, then maybe women should find other ways of moving if they have a fear of public transport. Now, I know that's unrealistic, but I was wondering for each of you, if you could maybe just shortly say, what is it that we need essentially to be focused on, not the shift from one mode to other modes, but how can we address people's concerns about using public transportation, and not just have people think, well, then the solution is stop using it. Maybe that's too big a question, but it's just maybe there's a message that we can leave people not hopeful with, but just being mindful of in terms of addressing this challenge further. And maybe Agita, if you want to start.
Yeah, I think the reasons it's not about the woman, and it's not about women that fear of harassment, because it is again, it's a cooperative work that we have to create. We need to collaborate to tackle this issue. It is not about putting the blame of the women and of seeking a different way of going with a or going not with a public transport. I think because the work that we do, it's mainly on the victim support, so we definitely focusing on the legislations and law enforcement. We realize that a stronger legal framework, it's highly important. It is crucial, because it needs to be able to enforce effectively. The moment when it's being enforced effectively and there is a clear mechanism on how to deal with the perpetrator in this case, we will see there is a reduce in terms of harassment. And the aspect that we see in the public space, as I already mentioned earlier, it is hard to basically let people to report this, as again, normally when it happened, the victim will definitely froze and they don't know what to do. So the only one who basically can see and to document the evidence is those who are the witness, the other passengers. And how we be able to basically ensure, and there is the feeling of protecting each other. This is a kind of a message that we have to promote in the public. And this is not going to be there unless we provide educations and awareness. I just want to take example of when I live in the UK, I think they have a very good message. Every single time I went to the bus, there's always three words that is so easy to remember, and they're always repeating it. So when you see something suspicious, see it, say it, sort it. So they make it easy and make it very memorable for everyone. So every single passengers memorize that. So this kind of things that we need, the education, the awareness, how we could be able to encourage witnesses, bystanders, to act when they actually witness harassment, because they are the one who play a huge role in fostering a supportive environment. And I think when we have legislations, or when we have the legal aspect, when we do the educations and awareness, the remain two aspect is that the gender sensitive planning, which is we are putting on the focus towards the public transport or the private transport, how they can basically create a transportation system to design the spaces, to design the system, or perhaps the operations, to ensure that there is a space for people to be able to feel safe, making sure that their staff is actually receive a gender sensitivity training, for example, so they understand how to see, how to target, or even how to help people when they report to the officers. And lastly, I think in terms of the inclusive design for the safety, which is the infrastructure itself, is play a huge role in women's perceptions of the safety. Simple design interventions like emergency communication tools, or a CCTV, or for example, the well-lit platforms that then they can significantly improve both the real sort of kind of like and perceived safety on a public transport. So, and I think when we talk about inclusive design for safety, we're also talking about whether or not there is a representative of women in a leadership in the public transport. We know the public transport is majority male dominated sector, so we need more women to be represented in the as a leader, in a woman in a public transport. So then we understand, and there is someone who basically can speak up and voices in our voice. So I think that's all from my end.
Federica, I'm going to go to you now. In terms of the question of should women then just use other options. Obviously, Agita's just given excellent examples of how that's not exactly the solution. But in your work, what would you say to decision makers or policymakers or just the general public in terms of, that it's not just as simple as not choosing one mode over another?
Well, we can choose another mode, but the problems are actually then exactly the same, multiplied in other infrastructure-based construction as well. We see it with cycling, with walking, with public transport, even with cars. So the security burden of not a feminist approach in all the infrastructure in the transport sector, it's spread. So it's not a problem just in public transport. You see it in all the other so you choose the most effective and the most secure that you feel and you perceive in your environment, but you re-see the same pattern, the same issues across all the transport issues. So you see with walking, where there is no lights, the street harassment is also a huge topic as well. So we address it with public transport, but you have it in a different approach. So it's more a planning issue. So you can switch from one to the other, but a feminist, a gender mainstreaming approach policy has to be shifted in all the mobility aspects. So from active mobility, so more walking and cycling, to the public transport with a multidimensional view. And that's the gender lens in the mapping cities in general. So I think that's the shift that has to be created in the policy making, in the clarification, how we want to structure and see our cities, and so that we can tackle the issue from different perspective.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think that's something I've learned in all my years of talking about this, is that it's simple enough to say, okay, well, if it's unsafe on the bus, don't take the bus. But the number of experiences of harassment, whether it's sexual or physical or otherwise verbal, just when getting on a bicycle or walking,
Well, when you walk, for example, you don't have even the driver to address if something happens, especially during night. So the harassment, it can be switched to another dimension if it's still there. Actually, tackling on public transportation is a way to talk about it and to report, at least in somehow, which is more difficult in other aspects as well, in other situations as well.
And Arianna, I'm going to give the last word to you. Any final thoughts, things that you think we haven't touched on that we need to make sure are important in the conversation?
Oh, well, I think that we addressed the point quite completely. Well, I think that, I totally agree with both Federica and Agita. And I think that basically the key to combat the normalization of harassment on public transport could be, involving the community as a whole, the bottom-up approach of our campaigns. I think that is the key to reach all the people, and also to make this kind of campaign particularly powerful and also authentic, because these campaigns are built by those who experience this challenge daily. So it addresses not only to, for example, institutions, but also has a society as a whole, promoting both cultural and structural change. So if we think about a short-term period solution, of course we have to address to institutions and NGOs, But if you think about a long-term achievement, we have to involve the entire community as a whole, because we think that, for example, when you are on public transportation, a bus or a metro or something like that, the first person that can help you and can support you is the person that is sitting beside you, And so if it is be trained to address this kind of situation and to support you, maybe this can be also useful for you But of course, it could be also like a strategy to prevent other people to commit this kind of harassment or abuse on public transportation. So we cannot have like a safe and public transportation for all if the whole community is not involved in ensuring this right to mobility for all of us.
Thank you, all three of you, for that insightful discussion. I've learned quite a bit about the different contexts of what's happening around the world. And I think what maybe is most important is that while Federica and Arianna, you're speaking about the European context, and Agita, you're speaking about the Indonesian context, I think that there's so many overlaps that we see that this is a global issue and that we should all be sharing resources and working together to not only help to identify the problem, but help to unleash the potential in terms of what can be done to make it so that regardless of gender, people feel they have equitable access to safe, harassment-free transport. So with that, I want to thank all three of you for joining me today for this conversation. And I look forward to the questions that may follow. And if people want to reach you after this, what is the best way that they can do that? I'll start with you, Agita.
We have our email available on our website, so feel free to go to our website, www.bully.org, and follow us on Instagram and DM us any other comments, or even if you would like to partner with us or even to take our resources. It's all for public. Some of the resources are also in English, so feel free to download, and we're more than welcome to collaborate and partner with organizations across the world.
And Arianna or Federica, whoever wishes to give the information for Road to 50%.
I will go for Road to 50%. Please feel free to look at us at our website, Road to 50%, or our email, road to 50% at gmail.it. And if you want to also text me or Arianna on LinkedIn on any other kind of profile, please feel free. We are very welcoming any kind of best practice or references or collaboration. As we say, we are a community. Agita, we are going to text you as well. Collecting best practices all over the world. Thank you again for the wonderful webinar.
Yeah, thank you all. All right. And with that, I'm going, stop. There we go. Welcome back, everybody. I'm recognizing the time. It's just after lunch now for those of us on the European side, and for the various places around the world. It could be any time for any of us, really. But I did, as I said, if anyone had questions, they could post them during the session. We had scheduled this for another 15 minutes, so I did want to bring one question to the forefront and ask. I believe Federica and Agita, you're still on the call. Yes. The question comes from someone, let me get the name right, from Angelica Berg, who is doing a PhD at the University of Coventry on focusing on designing safer public transport for women and girls. And her question is, actually, Angelica, would you want to unmute yourself and ask your question yourself?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering, because I've also been doing a lot of reading, and there's just so many interventions needed in so many different areas. And I'm currently considering what to focus on, if I want to focus more on barriers to reporting, because if more people report, then it will become easier to actually tackle it if there's more data that supports it. So the government might just fund more initiatives. Or would it be better to focus on supporting victims, or like bystander training, or general awareness campaigns, because there is a lack of awareness even in the UK where I'm based, and also lack of knowledge still. And I'm just currently thinking like what direction to take, and there's just so much needed, also like gender sensitive design, or design that makes people feel safer. And if you have any input on what you would think are currently the most urgent areas to focus on, or anything you found very impactful in your own work, that would be very good. Like, yeah, very useful to hear about.
Thanks for the question, Angelica. Federica or Agita, would you like to respond?
Hi, Angelica. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Am I audible enough? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your questions. And in terms of what's the most important, I think it really depends on where you are and the public understanding about this concern. I won't be able to say the same. For example, Jakarta and London, it's not exactly the same, right? It's not a comparison. Like, for example, I'm currently in Hong Kong right now, and they already have a super massive um, awareness in terms of sexual harassment right after right starting when they are in elementary school. So they have a comprehensive sexual education, they understand about boundaries, and the culture of people in here, it's just very respectful towards personal boundaries. But that completely different with Jakarta. So if I put because my project and the work that I do is basically in Jakarta, for Jakarta perspective, I think it really started on awareness perspective. Before even we talk about reporting, before even we talk about support system for the victim, awareness for all the level, and it has to be driven from the private sectors and the transport agency, because they are the one who creating the platform. They're the one who have to impose this in their own in their own platforms every single time. So I can't really say what would be the best in terms of in London, for example, in the UK where you are, because I think I give an example previously. When I live in the UK, it's the awareness is there, but how far is the awareness and how far is the implementations and how easy to report? I think that's the questions. So perhaps in the UK it's more on the gender sensitivity approach, but in Indonesia it really started from the awareness. So we have to really take a look on the place and the cultural sensitivity, and then the back to the understanding about the citizens and the public perspective. I hope that answers.
I would
Yeah,
add
that makes a lot
exactly.
of sense. Thank you.
It's for our
Sorry.
perspective is exactly the same. Sorry, Angelica, and thank you again for the question. I completely agree with Ajita, and it is very difficult to address the topic without understanding the cultural aspect of it. So the awareness campaign are actually the best way to address it from the understanding of the cultural aspect, but at the same time also knowing how to address it, in the sense we have seen also other campaigns who are trying to do awareness and seeing, instead of focusing, we just had a campaign in Italy that does exactly the same. Instead of addressing the mapping, the understanding of the problem, to kind of saying, okay, you are aware of the problem, deal with it. So addressing to understand and strategically fight the problem, instead of saying to the woman, you are aware of the problem now, so deal with it in the way that you can. And so also how to communicate and create awareness is different and difficult to address. So that's one of the key points. And at the same time, after that, you can then try to we have seen also in the webinar to tackle the other parts of the but the culture and the problem, the understanding of the problem has to be at the same level in all the country. And I think that Italy is not the same as the UK, and also other part of the UK is not the same as London. So that's very, very important as well. I hope it was clear what I meant with that.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, it's so important to consider the cultural context. So it makes a lot of sense.
Unless anyone has any other, thank you for the question, Angelica. Thank you for the responses, Agita and Federica. is if there's no other questions popping up in the chat, I might close us out for today. I do want to once again thank our guests for participating. Someone is typing something, so I'll let them type while I carry on. I think this is a topic that is much bigger than we can obviously tackle in a 1-hour webinar. And I think the more we can have these discussions, talk about things from the awareness side, but also things like where can we build those policies in for reporting, where can we build those trainings in for bystanders and for operators, and how do we start building systemic change? That's the only way in terms of this multi-pronged approach that we're going to really be able to properly address the fear and experience of violence in transport by women, but of course by everyone. But hopefully these conversations are just building upon the work that we're all doing to help move us forward. So there's a question about, will the recording of the webinar be published? Yes, it will be published in a few days to a week through the Women Mobilize Women channel. So keep an eye out on LinkedIn and Twitter for that. And then you can watch the full episode there. I also want to encourage you all to join us for our next webinar, which will be focused on the intersectional experience of gender, mobility, and pregnancy. We're quite excited to have this conversation, and I was able to interview 3 lovely women living in Kenya, and I've forgotten the other country. I'm really, really sorry. But please do attend. I think the conversation we had led to further activities by some of us to keep the conversation going. And it is this important time for many people who decide to have children. How they experience transport drastically changes, even just for 9 months. So I encourage you to come and join us for that conversation. That will be on the 26th of November at 2 o'clock Central European time. So mark your calendars, however that looks where you are in the world, and do join us. And we have one more episode coming after that on the intersection of gender mobility and the experience of LGBTQIA plus folks, and that will happen in December on the 11th or 12th. That date is to be confirmed, but do keep an eye out for that one. So with that, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for the questions. Thank you to our guests, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Melissa. Have a
Thanks,
good
Keisha.
lunchtime and afternoon.